Max stopped typing for a moment and eased himself back in his chair. Was this the real time and place? Was this where it had all begun? He couldn't think of any other time or place that it could have been. What was it about this point in time that had changed his life? Why was it that this meeting with John had so altered his life? He had met many people over the years. There were school friends, people he had grown up with, and people he so fondly remembered. There were student friends he had met at college. There were others that he had either met at work or people he knew sociably. There were so many people in his past that he knew, had known, and had been close to. But this was a one-off occasion, and he couldn't think or remember why this moment in time was so important. "I'm Max," he said, reaching out and taking his hand. "Max Carter." It had been as simple as that. The man stood next to him, took his hand, and after briefly shaking it, held on to it. John was of average size. He was slim and neatly dressed in a suit with a bright yellow tie. However, there was look about him. He was handsome, with the short blonde hair neatly parted and well cut. His face was narrow, and he was clearly good-looking. Clean-shaven, well-presented. His clothes suited him, and he appeared more formal than Max was dressed. Max was here in a t-shirt and jeans, but John had thought about his appearance and had dressed as a businessman. There was nothing informal about him, except his casual attitude. Max was immediately attracted to him, not because of his appearance or his looks, but there was something between the two of them. It was difficult to describe, and over the years he had fought with his own memory to think, why this man? Why this person who he had never met? Who would be the one person that he would make friends with? Who he would spend so much of his life with? This meeting was, if they had known each other all of their lives, as if they had known each other back in time. It was not the meeting of strangers, but the meeting of old friends who had known each other back in the midst of time. There was a connection, an understanding, a recognition that they were meeting not for the first time, but had fallen together through time to meet once again in this place and this time. They had met against a table of beers and wines in a large, cold, antiseptic room in the centre of Brussels. John held his hands closer to Max longer than he would be usual, but his blue eyes looked directly into his. They stayed there for a number of seconds, looking at each other. Finally, Max had removed his hands and turned back to the barman, but John's eyes continued to follow him. "Do you want another beer?" he asked John. "Yes, definitely, but not here," John replied quickly. He looked around the room where people were still talking in small groups. Max stood next to him, confused. "Why?" he asked. "It's okay here." John looked back to him with a quizzical look. "You like this place?" he asked, looking directly at Max. Max shrugged. "It's all right." John let out a short laugh. "Have you got any cash?" he asked. Max put his hand into his pocket of his jeans and pulled out a couple of euro notes. "Yes, about 30 euros. Is that enough?" "That's enough," replied John. "Stay here, and I'll go say goodbye to a few people, and then we'll go somewhere else." With that, John strode off across the room and started to talk to a couple of people. Max remained standing next to the drinks table, wondering what he was supposed to do. After a few months of standing there and watching John move from one person to another, he began to wonder if this was a good idea. After all, he didn't even know this man. He had planned to stay at this meeting and get to know a few people. John quickly finished his goodbyes and strolled quickly over to him. "Okay, come on, follow me." Without a second thought, John set off across the room towards the exit. Max followed on behind him. "Where are we going?" he asked as he walked quickly behind him. John was already walking quickly out of the room and into the hotel reception. "The reserve," he said, looking briefly over his shoulder. "The reserve?" asked Max. "Yeah. Don't you know it?" "No," he replied. "Follow me then," replied John, now picking up speed. They nodded to the hotel reception staff as they passed by, and then, pushing open the outer door, stepped out into the street in bright sunshine. The hotel was situated in a small square close to the Grand Place in the centre of Brussels. This was at the part of the city and small streets which led in and out of the square. They quickly crossed over the square, trying to avoid a few tourists who were lingering in the area. John clearly knew where he was going, and Max did his best to keep up with him. They strolled down one street and then turned sharply into another that led towards the Grand Place. It was a narrow cobbled street with bars on one side and shops on the other. Halfway down the street, John halted outside a wooden door. Over the door, a small rainbow flag hung, which indicated it was a gay-friendly bar. John stopped by the door and waited for Max to catch up. "Here we are," he said, pointing to the bar. "La Reserve. Come on. I'm desperate for a decent beer." He pushed the heavy door open and entered the bar. Max followed him, trying to work out where he was. He wasn't familiar with the city centre, and this was a street off the main area. John held the door open and they both went in. La Reserve was a long, narrow cafe with wooden floors. All along the right side was the serving bar, which stretched the length of the room. On the other side, there were a few tables and chairs where people were sitting. The place looked old, with large pictures on the wall and low lighting. If it hadn't been for the sun shining through the window at the far end, then the whole room would have been in darkness. It was a high window with coloured glass, which gave it an almost medieval look. John strolled down the bar, passing two men who were sitting at the bar stools. He waved at the man behind the bar. "Hey, John," the man said behind the bar, wiping the beer glass with a towel. He was clearly well known here. Max followed him to the end of the bar, where there was a gap in the bar. He immediately walked through the gap and went into a small kitchen area at the back. Max stopped at the gap and could hear John speaking French to someone in the back. Max looked around the room. It was quiet. There were a few men talking to each other, but there was no music playing, which was unusual. Most bars these days had loud music blaring out. Even though people were happily talking to each other without any interruption, it just seemed very quiet. John came back into the bar and pulled out two empty bar stools and sat down. Max followed him and sat on the bar stool next to him. John leaned over towards the bar and standing behind the bar, and it was just a very, very quiet bar. "Two doubles," he said in a loud voice. The man nodded and reached under the bar and pulled out two bottles of beer. Reaching behind the one at the shelves, he picked out two distinctively shaped glasses. He pulled off the metal caps from the bottles and began to fill the glasses one by one. Walking over to them, he placed the filled beer glasses in front of them. Bar staff always placed Belgian beer glasses with the name side towards the customer. They both took hold of the glasses and took a drink. "Have you really never been here before?" asked John, looking towards him. Max shook his head. "No. This is my second home in Brussels. I always come here. They all know me here. I've been coming here for years," replied John, and winked to the man behind the bar. The two of them sat together on the bar stools like old friends drinking their Belgian beers. John was talking to the barman in French while Max looked around the bar. He was here in a real bar in Brussels, surrounded by locals, and for the first time he felt as though he had arrived. Before now he had felt as though he was a stranger, even a tourist, but thanks to John, he was now being introduced to the real life in the city. Occasionally someone would come up from further in the bar and then say something to John. once again in French, which Max was finding now that he spoke fluently. John would introduce them to Max. They were really not interested in him when they discovered that he only spoke English. His French was very basic and something he had inherited from his school days. Someone in the bar noticed that he was speaking English and introduced himself. Turned out he was Dutch and that English was his second language. Everyone appeared to be friendly. They both finished their beers together and Max ordered another 2 beers from the barman. He was beginning to realize that Belgian beers were stronger than he was normally used to, and they were beginning to feel at home. John didn't appear to notice them much, but Max just assumed that he was used to the strength and had adapted. For Max, the effects were beginning to show. He was now relaxed, slightly drunk. I felt happy to be here. It was the first time he had really truly relaxed since he had arrived. John would occasionally ask him questions about what he did and where he came from. It turned out that they both had something in common. They had both grown up in the north of England and had similar backgrounds. John had come here quite a few years ago and had made Brussels his home. Like Max, he had come to work, and like Max, he had found a reason to live here. Max hadn't quite decided how long he was going to stay here, but for the moment he was happy to think he was going to be here for some time, and was happy to join in the expat life in the centre of Brussels. Since being here, Max had always assumed that he would end his contract and then return to Britain, back to his old life. His partner and his friends would be the same, and life would continue as if nothing had changed. As the evening progressed, he was beginning to doubt that. He was beginning to think that he had found a new life and that during this evening something had changed. John was friendly. He was entertaining. He appeared to know so many people and was relaxed being here. Max found himself being jealous that John had found his life here in Brussels. Max was still new and had to find his own way. Perhaps this man sitting beside him, chatting in both English and French, was the person to do it. This is where it had started. This is where that Max had begun his new life. This was the time and place where Max now realized that there was someone who could guide him and show him how to live a new life. As they drank more beer, Max relaxed even further and was finding that he was enjoying himself, although the experience was totally new to him. Here he was sitting with a group of people he had never met before, but were treating him as a local and were asking him questions. Being a friend of John's had its benefits, and he was beginning to realize that he was, in fact, networking, but in a different way, in a different atmosphere. "Are you gay?" asked John suddenly. Max stopped for a moment. The question surprised him. He didn't know what to say or how to respond. "I don't know," he said hesitantly. No one had ever asked him anything like this before. For a moment he felt embarrassed. In any other situation he would have felt the question was intrusive. Where he came from, people were not so open, and such things were never discussed. He seriously didn't know if he was gay. He had Jen at home, and they had been happy together, so the question had never come up. "No, I don't think so," he replied, being unsure of what to say. Here, though, in this bar, with the people around, the question simply appeared to be what it was. A simple question. Nothing implied, nothing insinuated, just a question. "Are you gay?" "Are you gay?" asked John. "No, Are you gay?" he asked John. "Oh, yes," John replied, taking another drink from his beer. "Definitely. Enjoying it." I've had most of these guys. You can ask them, he said, laughing out loud. Max didn't know what to say. He looked around the bar. The men were of an older generation than them, and as he watched each of them talking to their friends, he thought that perhaps not. Someone like John, who, if he was gay, could have any gay man he wanted. Someone who looked like him and was as friendly as him could have anyone he wanted, gay or not. So guess that it was possible, but for himself he could honestly say that there was not one man in the bar that he found even vaguely attractive. He had always known that he had found some men attractive, but he had never thought he was gay. He liked women as well, so what did that make him? Bisexual? Okay, thought Max to himself. Perhaps I could be bisexual. You know this is a gay bar, don't you? Said John, noticing Max's apparent confusion. You can tell that by the rainbow flag over the door. Technically, though, describe themselves as gay-friendly. That's so they don't put off the normal customers. In reality, though, most men come here, they're gay. Max looked around the bar again. He noticed for the first time that there were no women here, just men. Not that it was important, but now that John had pointed it out, the men did seem close to each other, but he was new to Brussels, so perhaps that was how people normally behaved in the city centre. He was beginning to realise he had a lot to learn. So do you fancy anyone? Asked John, noticing that Max was now taking more of an interest in the people around him. No, not really, Max laughed, a smile crossing his face. He was beginning to blush. Although he couldn't see his face, he could feel that he was glowing slightly. Oh, don't worry about it, said John. This is Brussels. No one cares if you're gay, straight, or whatever you are. In a city like this, anyone has to get on with everyone else, so that's why I like this place. No one cares. You're free to be whoever you want to be. Enjoy life. That's what it's all about. Max took another drink from his glass. Yes, that was what he was looking for. This was the place where he could be whoever he wanted to be. No expectations, no questions, no having to live the old life that he left behind, no having to explain himself to anyone, because here in this city, no one knew him. Max was beginning to feel a sense of relief, a sense of freedom that he had never felt before. It was a new experience. For a second, he wondered what it would be like to be gay if he was gay, but he wasn't sure. For a second, he wondered what it would like to have sex with another man. It was a thought that surprised him. Then again, as John said, this was Brussels and anything was possible. What about you? Max asked, now turning towards John. What's your story? Do you have anyone special? Me? He replied, looking slightly surprised. Yes. I live with my boyfriend. We have an apartment here in the city centre. It's not far from here by the Belgacom building. I used to work there at the Belgacom building, so the place used to be convenient for me getting to work. Max nodded. So where's your boyfriend tonight? He asked. He's at home, John replied. He's looking after the dog. He didn't want to come out tonight. You have a dog? Asked Max, suddenly surprised by this sign of domesticity. John didn't appear to be the sort of man who would have a dog for some reason. Yes, Tosca, he replied. She's a King Charles Spaniel. She's gorgeous. We rescued her one night. This guy came into the bar with her as a puppy and wanted to get rid of her. So we bought her off him. The bastard was going to abandon her. I couldn't have that, so she came home with me. She's nearly 2 years old now. And your boyfriend, what's he like? Max asked. Kurt, said John once again, looking surprised. He's great. He's the love of my life. I've never loved anyone else like him. We've been together for nearly 3 years now. He's great in bed. Max laughed. The openness was something that he was going to have to get used to. This was certainly not like any evening he'd before had at home. The talk there was always about sport and politics or something on the news, never anything like this. So what else do you want to know? Asked John. How many men I've had? Max shook his head and smiled. No, that's okay. I really don't need to know. Too much information, he replied. I can tell you, said John, laughing, if you really want to know. No, replied Max. Really, I don't want to know. That's your business. For a few seconds they sat at the bar and finished off the beers. Do you want another beer? Asked Max. He was beginning to feel the effects of these strong Belgian beers and was starting to wonder if it was a good idea to continue drinking. For the moment he thought he was safe, but he had to find his way home back to his apartment before he fell over. It would not be a good idea in front of this local expat to show himself up, show that he couldn't handle his beer. However, John made the decision. One more, then I have to go. Kurt will have dinner ready, and he gets annoyed if I'm late. He's a good cook. I'm lucky to have him. John motioned towards the barman and asked for another 2 doubles. The barman noticed and then reached under the bar and brought out 2 more bottles. He opened them and, after taking 2 fresh glasses from the shelf behind him, brought them over to where they were sitting. He immediately took the used glasses they had in front of them and started to wash them. Cheers, said John, starting to drink. Cheers, said Max, wondering if it was such a good idea. One more, he thought, and then he would have to go home while he was still able to walk. For the rest of the evening, their conversation was filled with various topics. Some about living in Brussels, some about sex, some about Max and what he was planning to do. For a moment, Max was lost in the atmosphere and the company of his newfound friend. There was no reason to hurry. He had nowhere to go but back to an empty apartment. He would probably turn on the TV when he got back and watch some film or something before he went to bed. John had a home to go to with someone he loved and his dog. Max envied him. He had a life here. Perhaps not the life that Max would particularly want for himself, but he did have a life worth living. They made sure that they had each other's phone numbers and they would keep in touch. John was open to the idea of them meeting up again some evening and having a few more beers. For a moment, Max was afraid that John would be one of these people who would just disappear after these evenings. That would have been a shame, as they'd got on so well together. But John was relaxed, friendly, and able. He didn't suggest that they would do anything more than have a beer together and enjoy each other's company. 2 foreigners together in a foreign land. 2 British men on their own and with a lot to talk about. 2 men who knew what it was to come to another country and find their own way. John had done this, and from what Max could see, he had done it very successfully. He was happy, and he had found something that perhaps he would never have found if he had stayed in Britain. He was living, and that was something that Max now realized he wanted. It was something that Max suddenly realized had been at the back of his mind when he had agreed to come to Brussels. He was looking for a life. He was beginning to think that finally he had found a life. Perhaps not the life that he had expected or planned, but it was a life.